Once upon a time, in the quiet town of Egwekoro, lived a woman named Ozioma. She was known in the town as the most elegant woman who had ever walked the red sand roads of the village. Her skin was the color of golden honey, her smile could soften a quarrel, and her voice carried the softness of morning breeze. She was loved by all and envied by many. Ozioma had a daughter named Zolape. From the moment the child was born, it was clear she was different. Not different in a bad way. No, Zolape was beautiful, but she was quiet. Very quiet. Unlike other children, she never cried loudly, never babbled, and never played with sand or splashed in the rain. She spent her days watching people silently with her large round eyes that always seemed to know something no one else did. Ozioma tried her best to raise Zolape properly. She gave her the best clothes, sent her to the best private school in town, and made sure she always looked presentable. But Zolape never smiled in pictures, never danced at parties, and never made friends. People in the village started whispering. They said strange things about the girl, some even saying she wasn't born of flesh but of spirits. Ozioma ignored them. She smiled when they smiled, waved when they waved, but deep down, she knew that they might be right. Years passed, and Zolape grew into a tall, slender girl with a presence so strong it made people uncomfortable. Teachers often complained that she answers questions even before they even asked. Her classmates said her eyes made them feel cold. Still, Ozioma loved her daughter deeply, even if she didn't always understand her, but she feared her too. Not because Zolape was bad, but because there was something about her that felt unnatural, like the wind that blows before the rain but carries no sound. One day, a new man moved into the neighborhood. His name was Azubik. He was charming, kind, and ran a small clinic in the heart of the town. He had a soft laugh and always smelled like mint and fresh soup. Women admired him, but he only had eyes for one person, Ozioma. Their love story started slowly. A hello here, a wave there, a ride to the market, a bowl of pepper soup shared under the mango tree. Soon, Azubik was visiting Ozioma's house more often than the town crier visited the palace. At first, Zolape said nothing. She would sit in her corner, her eyes tracking Azubik's every movement. Her face was unreadable. Ozioma noticed the silence but didn't press. She thought Zolape just needed time to adjust. After all, it had only been the two of them all these years. But Zolape wasn't adjusting. She was studying Azubik like a book. Things changed the day Azubik brought home a gift, a necklace, a simple gold chain with a tiny blue stone in the middle. He handed it to Zolape, hoping it would melt her heart. Zolape took it quietly, her fingers lingering on the blue stone for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled, her first smile in years. Azubik beamed. Ozioma clapped happily. But what they didn't know was that Zolape had seen something in that blue stone, something no one else saw. That night, Zolape locked herself in her room. She stared at the necklace for hours. Then she dipped it into a small bowl of rainwater she had kept hidden under her bed for days. The water hissed. The blue stone turned black. Zolape nodded slowly to herself and whispered a word under her breath, a word no one understood. The next morning, Azubik didn't show up at the clinic. He didn't show up at the church. He didn't pick up his phone. Ozioma was worried. She rushed to his house with her wrapper barely tied. What she found shook her to her bones. Azubik was lying in bed, sweating, shivering, his eyes darting from corner to corner like someone running from ghosts. The doctor from the next town said it was a strange fever, one he couldn't explain. Azubik kept murmuring something about a girl with black eyes and long fingers. Ozioma rushed back home to check on Zolape, sensing that it was coming from her. She found her daughter in the living room, eating roasted groundnuts and watching cartoons. Her face was as calm and her eyes were blank. That night, Ozioma couldn't sleep. She stood by Zolape's door for hours, afraid to knock. She finally opened the door and found Zolape kneeling beside her window, humming a strange tune with a white powder spread in a circle around her. Ozioma screamed, but Zolape didn't flinch. The days that followed were filled with a kind of silence that made even the birds avoid their compound. Ozioma moved around the house like a shadow, watching her daughter closely, but never daring to ask questions. Azubik remained in the clinic bed, still shaking, still whispering about shadows and cold eyes. Every pastor Ozioma called said the same thing: pray harder. But Ozioma knew that this was not a matter of prayers. Something dark has been awoken, and she feared it had been living right under her roof all along. Zolape returned to her quiet routines. She went to school, came back, and stayed locked up in her room. No more humming, no more white powders, no more circles, just quiet. But Ozioma had started noticing small things. Her mirrors clouded up even when there was no heat. Her spoons would shake lightly on their own. The flowers in the garden had started to die one by one. She tried to ignore these things, told herself that she was imagining it. But the truth haunted her like a shadow at midday. One Saturday morning, Ozioma received a call from Azubik's younger brother, Taye. His voice was heavy with worry. He said Azubik had started screaming her name in the middle of the night, that he would wake up with scratch marks in his chest, even though no one had touched him, that he kept begging the girl to leave him alone. Ozioma dropped the phone with trembling hands. Her heart beat so loud, it echoed in her ears. That night, she decided to confront her daughter. She walked into Zolape's room with the boldness of a lioness, only to find her daughter fast asleep, her face so innocent it could melt a rock. Ozioma felt foolish. Maybe she had been overthinking everything. Maybe it was just a coincidence, just stress. She turned to leave, but then something caught her eye. A tiny notebook tucked underneath Zolape's pillow. Ozioma picked it up carefully and opened the first page. What she saw made her knees give way. Drawings, pages and pages filled with drawings, not of flowers or cartoons or friends, but of Azubik, sick, pale, lying in bed like a dead man. On the next page, he was surrounded by dark birds. In another, he was being dragged by hands that came out of the ground. And then there was the final page, one that had been scribbled on so hard it almost tore through. It showed Ozioma holding a baby, while Zolape stood behind her with her eyes blackened, her hands stretched out like claws. Ozioma dropped the book and ran out. She couldn't sleep that night. She stayed on her knees till morning, praying and sobbing into her pillow. She couldn't believe that the daughter she had raised with so much love had turned into something she no longer recognized. But Zolape wasn't done. The next day, she walked up to her mother and said she wanted to go see Azubik. Her voice was calm, but Ozioma said no firmly. She told her to stay away from him. Zolape didn't argue. She simply nodded and turned back and walked to her room. But later that night, Azubik screamed again. This time, he ran out of his house, barefoot and wild, and he was found later at the village square, yelling about blood, smoke, and a girl with a mirror for a face. He was taken to a psychiatric hospital in the next town. The town of Egwekoro went into an uproar. Rumors started flying like dry leaves in Harmattan. People said Azubik had touched something forbidden. Others said he had been cursed. But a few whispered something else, that the quiet girl in Ozioma's house had eyes that could see more than just people. Ozioma couldn't take it anymore. She went to the oldest woman in the village, Mama Agbonna, known for her wisdom and strange herbs. Mama Agbonna listened quietly as Ozioma poured out her heart. Then she smiled sadly and said, "You should have come to me the first day she was born." Ozioma stared at her, confused. She was never an ordinary child, Mama Agbonna continued. Some children are born with a mirror inside them. They reflect everything you give: love, fear, hate, and even secrets. The world calls them strange, but they are only what we make them. Your child has learned to feed on your fears. Ozioma broke down in tears. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Agbonna leaned closer and said, "You must enter her world before she fully enters yours." That night, Ozioma returned home and stood outside her daughter's door for a long time. Inside the room, Zolape was awake, waiting for her. Ozioma stood there for minutes that felt like hours. The words of Mama Abunna spinning in her head like dry corn in a grinding stone. "You must enter her world," the old woman had said. But what did that even mean? How could she step into a place she did not understand? A world her own child had built with silence, secrets and shadows. With a trembling hand, Ozioma turned the doorknob and stepped into Zolape's room. The room was cold, not the kind of cold that came from a harmattan breeze, but the kind that sank into your bones and whispered through your soul. The curtains were drawn shut, the lights were off, and there, in the corner of the room, sat Zolape, not sleeping, not reading, just sitting there, staring at a small mirror in her hand. Ozioma took a deep breath and walked closer. She sat at the edge of the bed, trying not to shiver as she looked at her daughter. "I need your drawings," she said softly. Zolape didn't move. Her fingers only tightened around the mirror in her hands. "I saw what you've been doing. I saw Azubik. I saw myself. I know. I know what you have become," Ozioma said. Zolape finally turned her head, and for the first time in her life, Ozioma saw something in her daughter's eyes that she could not explain. There were no longer just eyes, there were doors. A thin glass door between this world and another. "But I still love you," Ozioma said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Even if you've become a stranger, even if I have failed you, you are still mine." Zolape's grip on the mirror loosened slightly. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but instead of words, a low hum rose from her throat, the same eerie tone Ozioma had heard that night by the window. The mirror began to glow faintly. Ozioma knew then. This was the moment Mama Abunna had warned her about. Without thinking, she reached forward and grasped the mirror. The room shook. A blinding light filled the space, and everything disappeared. When Ozioma opened her eyes, she was no longer in the room. She was standing in the middle of a vast empty place. A place without walls, without color, without sound. Floating before her were fragments, broken memories like pieces of a shattered glass. A baby crying, a little girl drawing circles in the dirt, a mirror falling and cracking, and a woman screaming. Then she saw her, Zolape, but not as the quiet girl in the real world. This Zolape looked different. Her eyes were full of pain, her mouth twisted like she wanted to cry but she didn't know how. "You left me," Zolape said softly. "I didn't know," Ozioma replied. "I don't understand. You only loved the perfect part of me." Ozioma stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the girl. "Then let me love all the parts, even the broken ones." The space trembled, light burst, and then silence. When Ozioma woke up, she was lying in a hospital bed. Her sister, Ndidiamaka, sat beside her, her eyes swollen from crying. The room was filled with flowers and whispers. "What happened?" Ozioma asked weakly. Her sisters grabbed her hand. "You collapsed." They said it was exhaustion, mental breakdown. "You've been out for 3 days now," Ndidiamaka said. Ozioma's heart jumped. Where is my daughter? Where is Zolape?" There was a long pause. "You've been saying that name in your sleep," her sister said slowly. "But Ozioma, who is Zolape?" Ozioma blinked. What do you mean? What do you mean? Zolape is my daughter. Where is she?" "You never had a daughter," her sister replied, looking at her with pity. The room spun, and Ozioma looked at her like she had seen a ghost. "You were married once," Ndidiamaka continued. "You were married a long time ago. But your husband died, and the child didn't survive birth. You never had a daughter, Ozioma." Ozioma's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands. In her right palm was a tiny cracked mirror, and in the reflection, a girl was smiling. Ozioma stared at the mirror in her palm, her heart pounding like a talking drum during a village festival. The glass was cracked, but in its reflection, she could still see the smiling girl. It was Zolape. Her skin was glowing, her eyes were gentle, her lips stretched into a smile that didn't belong in a hospital room. Ozioma's lips trembled as she looked up at her sister again. "But she was real," she whispered. "She lived with me. She went to school. She held my hand." Didiamaka looked at her with pity, her eyes already glistening with worry. "Ozioma, you've been alone for years. After your husband died, you became very isolated. You used to talk about a child you lost. You said her name would have been Zolape. The doctor said the grief never left you, that maybe you created her in your mind to cope." Ozioma couldn't speak. Her throat was tight, her eyes blurred. She looked back at the small mirror in her hand. Zolape was still smiling at her, but the smile wasn't cruel now. It was soft, peaceful, as if something had been completed. And then the reflection began to fade. Bit by bit, the image dissolved, like steam vanishing into thin air, until there was nothing left but Ozioma's tired face staring back at herself. In that moment, memories came flooding back, not as shadows or visions, but as painful truths. There had never been a quiet girl who answered questions before they were asked. There had never been a daughter who poured salt in stew or drew dark birds in notebook. There had never been anyone named Azubik who courted her in the warm evenings of Egwekoro. Ozioma had been alone all along. The house she lived in, the whispers she heard, the laughter that echoed, the arguments, they were all echoes of her pain, built carefully in her mind, a story told and retold until it felt real. The mirror had been the only thing that remained from her past, a gift from her husband before their baby was lost. She had stared into it so many times, wishing, imagining, creating. Zolape wasn't born of flesh, she was born of grief. Ozioma wept silently, but her tears weren't bitter. They were warm and cleansing. For the first time in many years, she understood what had happened, what she had done. Zolape had come to her not as a curse, but as a lesson, a way for her to face her deepest fears, her unbearable loneliness, and to finally say goodbye. Ozioma broke down in tears, weeping as a baby. Didiamaka held her hand tighter. "You will be okay, my sister." Ozioma nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. She placed the cracked mirror beside her and whispered, barely loud enough for the world to hear, "Goodbye, my Zolape. Thank you." And outside, the wind picked up gently, brushing past the hospital wind like the final touch of a child's hand, soft, fleeting, and free. After that day, Ozioma moved in with her sister. She started her life again, living each day at a time. 1 year later, she met a man named Emeka, who asked for her hand in marriage. Ozioma and Emeka got married in a beautiful, simple ceremony, and she lived happily ever. My dear story lovers, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. What lesson did you take away from today's dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for watching and stay blessed. See you in the next one. Mwah.